All right, sorry to keep you waiting. My pool person hasn't shown up today yet. They're supposed to come, I think, Tuesdays and Fridays, and I was waiting like to let her out, um, and to see if they would come. But I mean, maybe they'll come before it gets completely dark, but and we'll hear her bark. But I'm hoping not, because I really want to read to you. What I remembered when I grabbed the book is yesterday talking about the panini maker. That's why I titled the stream a panini. Okay. Um, like my she was a very summery outfit today. Okay. I'm gonna show you where we're at. This is what we read. This is what we have to go now. Page 495. Pull you guys up here. It's so funny, like she comes right in and I'm just like, oh, you want to hang out with me. Mm. All right, guys, grab your paninis. I'd like to say this word. Okay. Oh, okay. Do you know the story about how Dad met Mom? This is his sister, Jack's sister, in the past talking to him. Jack nodded, for he did know this story, that Lawrence was a brand new hand on a burn crew that was working the ranches east of Wichita. And one of these ranches was the one where Ruth grew up, and they met and, as was the custom back then, went on 2 dates, then got married. Wow. Two whole days. Love at first sight. Yeah, he fell in love at first sight. Bingo. Evelyn said. But did you know that it wasn't Mom he fell in love with? It wasn't? It was Mom's sister. Oh, what's Mom has a sister? A younger sister. They haven't spoken in years for obvious reasons. Dad took one look at that girl, Mom's little sister, and he fell in love just like that. They flirted the whole week he was working there, and at the end of the week he proposed, and she said no. Why? She had to. Her father wouldn't allow it. He had all these antique and chauvinist ideas about honor and tradition, real sexist stuff. Apparently, a younger sister couldn't get married before the older one. It's how things were done. It's one of those dumb rules. The proposal itself was a big insult. And so, to smooth things over, Dad did what he thought was the honorable thing. He proposed to the older sister instead. He married Mom, his second choice. Oh, God. And she's never forgiven him for that. Well, she didn't have to say yes. How do you know all this? He told me once. They both stared at their father in the distance, watched him as he slowly walked the south pasture's fence line. The way he described that day, Evelyn said, it's like he knew immediately. He met this girl, and it was like their souls had met before. He's never told you the story? No. Our souls travel at night. That was what he said. That our souls leave our body and wander the earth, sometimes as a bird, sometimes as a mouse. You can see what they're up to, occasionally in your dreams. And when they meet another soul, you'll sense it if you ever meet that person in real life. You'll register that familiarity, that spark. And that's the person you're destined to be with. That does not sound like something Dad would say. He said it a long time ago when I was a kid, younger than you. He really is a romantic deep down. He wasn't always like this, so, worn out. He's a really noble and sweet guy at heart, but of course, Mom doesn't see that. Evelyn, well, because she's the second choice. Why did she marry him then? Evelyn dipped her brush into the black paint on her palette and considered her canvas for a moment. Did you know, she said, that the first explorers who came to Kansas thought it was a big wasteland? They actually called it a desert, the Great American Desert. You know why? No, it was the lack of trees. They thought if trees couldn't live here, nothing could. So they misunderstood the whole place, which is basically what Mom does. They watched Lawrence as he stopped and leaned against a fence post, looking out across the land, staring at the field, which was due for burning whatever the weather allowed for it. Those explorers, Evelyn said, were looking for the one thing that didn't grow. So they didn't notice all the things that did grow. It's an important lesson. If you cling too hard to what you want to see, you'll miss what's really there. She brought her brush to the canvas and, with the lightest pressure, drew the figure of Lawrence Baker into her scene. A little stick of a man, a tiny presence in all that abundant country. It would become Jack's most lasting image of his father, alone, outside, looking over the land, contemplating how best to burn it all down. Next chapter. There was food. There was so much food, and there were volunteers serving the food. There was potato salad, egg salad, pea salad. What the heck is pea salad? I heard of potato salad. That's typical, what, picnic food. There was cauliflower salad. Now that sounds monstrosity. There was noodle salad. Noodles. It's called pasta salad. There was green bean salad, and my sister made a pasta salad when she was here. It was so good. She found like a can. I got have like canned chicken in my pantry. I thought Fila might like, and she used that. And what else did she use? Because I should remember it because it wasn't good. I, I ate like all of it. Anyway, there was green bean salad with bits of brown dry onion. There was, at the end of it all, on the farthest edge of the table, bright and red, like the tip of a matchstick, Jello salad. There were sandwiches and buns, potato chips and dip, coffee, Kool-Aid. There was water. There were white plastic spoons for the coffee, powdered cream, styrofoam cups. There were Rice Krispie treats and fudge brownies and chocolate chip brownies and cake. What is this, a party? There was also beans. There were long banquet tables, for the most part accessible from both sides, on which the food was presented. There were people wandering into the church basement, coming in from the October chill, squinting in the fluorescent room, eyes adjusting, clusters of people in family shaped groups, people in ill fitting black jackets or dresses, pastel or floral, making their way down the stairs into the basement's warmer air. There were greeters smiling, waiting, greeting. There was enjoyment of the warmth. There were people, old, inflexible, unstable, slowing the progress down the stairs. There were people wondering if it was okay to start eating, then calling for the family, Lawrence's family, his wife, Ruth, his son, Jack, because it's only right that kin should eat first. There was this church basement, walls covered in green shag carpet. The walls covered in carpet? Sounds like an asylum. Decorated with drawings by the kids, Sunday school masterpieces, Jesus walking on water, Jesus walking on palm fronds, Jesus with his forehead all bloodied by a thorny hat. There was French onion dip, and there was ranch dip. There were lunch meats, ham, turkey, roast beef that were all slightly different hues of basically the same gray. There were two lines of people, paper plates and napkins, squeezable mustard, a cereal bowl of mayonnaise, pickles. There were kids already asking for dessert. There were strips of wide white paper, not tablecloths. Asylum picnic. No, it sounds like a funeral because they noted they're wearing black jackets, but we'll see. Church, I mean, yeah, it sounds like it's probably the sister. I think they alluded to the something happening to the sister. So there were large men in the front of the line, and wisecracks from the skinnier ones. Leave some for me, buddy. Clay sodden with bean juice, tipping from mounds of potato salad near disasters. There was red jello with bananas and grapes and strawberries, and also red jello without any fruit at all, plain spotless jello. There were buns, they were white and they were wheat. There were cheeses dotted with oil from sitting out. There was chili in a crock pot, volunteers serving drinks with jerking hands, wrinkled, spotted, ancient hands. There was red Kool-Aid and there was orange Kool-Aid. There were kids who were bigger than the last time they'd been seen, kids growing up so fast, and oh, how time flies. There were sweet pickles and dill pickles, someone who licked the mayo knife absent-mindedly and put the knife back while others appalled watched. There were cookies, chocolate chip and sugar. There was a not too recent photo of Lawrence, people saying he's in a better place now and his life was so cruel. Oh, maybe it's not the sister, it's the father. Oh, because they did say he was sick. Oh, that's sad. Okay. And he would have loved this meal. There was an old man saying to Jack, "The last time I saw you, you were only this big, and you helped me wash the car. Do you remember?" And Jack not remembering at all. There were people saying, all the way from Chicago, "Well, we would have been so he would have been so happy you're here," and Jack nodding, producing the expected facial expressions, the expected polite responses, but feeling numb on the inside, just looking around, observing, registering, cataloging facts, but not feeling any particular way about them. There were opinions about the Jesus in his crown of thorns drawing, kind of violent. Some said, "Kind of too much blood for Sunday school, don't you think?" There were boys, restless in stiff clothes and hard shoes, and cries from the infants, concomitant flashes of optimism. The young keep coming, humanity endures. There were mothers quietly warning children off the more suspect foods, oily, eggy, high risk breeding ground for salmonella and God knows what else, E. coli, Campylobacter, Staphylococcus. There was a prayer started by our old pastor, the sanguine, the casual jeans and t-shirt pastor. Our Lord and Savior, bless this food. There were heads bowed, fists clasped, and pressed to foreheads. There was, "Dear Lord, I know Lawrence is looking down on this meal and smiling down from heaven right now. And how do I know this? Well, I will tell you. It's because I got to minister to Lawrence this last week, and from that time, from our time together, I know about his faith in God or the Bible, and I don't choose who goes to heaven, but I'll bet Lawrence is there now because he said so. He said about his faith, and he knew that his time, what was left of it, here on this earth or world, in this his life, because of the cancer, was coming up, and he was so at peace with that, with the coming up of his time or dying, so very much at peace, and he knew he was going to heaven because he believed, because Jesus was his savior or rock, because though I walk through the valley of death and all, because it's a choice, see, you fear no evil, and nobody who goes to heaven is surprised to go to heaven. Nobody's like, what am I doing in heaven? Because you choose how you live. And if you want to know where you go, if you choose wrong, I will tell you it is hell. So anybody goes to hell, it's not our fault, it's their fault because They decided it for their own selves because it is a choice, which is why Lawrence, I know, is smiling down at us right now, and he fears no evil. And let that be a lesson to all of us here today and in life to be more like Lawrence, in that the way he chose was the right way because he chose heaven or the rock. Amen. There were nods of agreement, silent, substantial nods, and repeated amens from the crowd. The amen echo. There was the sound of chewing, people going for seconds. There were smoke breaks. There were memories shared about attending Sunday school here, same pastor, same green carpet walls. There were questions about how they cleaned those walls with a vacuum. There were thoughts about how Lawrence looked at his last days, in his last days, so worn out, so tired. They there were the volunteers asking, who wants the rest of this turkey? There were plans made involving changing clothes and getting out of this jacket and getting out of this tie and getting comfortable again. Plans made involving the leftover ham and beer and sitting in lawn chairs in someone's garage visiting, someone saying, I don't know what else to do, so I might as well eat. There were the people who spoke to Jack before leaving. I'm so sorry, and God be with you, to his silent nods. There was so much still to do. There were flowers to collect and transport, and food to split up and send home, and decisions to be made about the money still to be collected for the cost of the service and the casket, and still the matter of thanking everyone who had sent flowers, and still the need to notify everyone who would want to know but does not yet know, and still the financial affairs and the reading of the will and the going through the house and cataloging and collecting and tossing all the things that needed to be tossed and all those memories that will be found and what should be kept and what should be given away and what to do now that this man, this father, is gone. There were leftovers, there were dirty dishes, there was cleaning, packaging, containing, refrigeration, there was looking under tables. There was a baby's bright red rattle and a money clip, both put into lost and found. There was filling out, climbing upstairs, groaning at aching knees. There was the last person locking the doors, lights out, the quiet hush. There was the walk into the sun, the cold, the day, the season, the year, the next great loss, the next big shock, living and breathing and longing for all the people who were, like Lawrence, no longer there. Next chapter. So it was Lawrence. The only reason a prairie is because of fire. Without regular fire, a prairie would be slowly overrun. Trees would encroach upon the grasses, and the cottonwood tree, especially, a tree whose lint like seeds can travel many miles on the Kansas wind, easy to root and quick to grow. The cottonwood shoots up 8 feet per year, a biologic sprint whose whole purpose is to squeeze in a little life before the next obliterating fire comes. And the fires have always come, sometimes between early March and late August, when the air churns with electricity and heat, lightning, and a single strike can ignite grass that's gone summer crisp, creating an inferno that could, in those eons before fences and fire departments, burn through a million acres. A cottonwood tree can't survive a fire. Too much of its autonomy is above ground, exposed and vulnerable. But for the blue stem grass of the Flint Hills, grass with roots that go 20 feet down, a fire is a simple thing, a haircut, a trim, a healthy prune. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Lightning also cause wildfires. Well, it didn't here today, and that's good. I just stayed home. The rain. I did take the bath because Daryl told me last time, like, he let me know that, because I was afraid that I could get, like, electrocuted, and he said that's only if you have, like, copper pipes, and that I probably don't, so I didn't die. Uh, it could be said that grass of the prairie evolved with fire. Mm. That it evolved to accommodate fire, and it does this by keeping most of itself covert, subterranean, protected, and insulated and unseen. So take away the fire, the land and the landscape of the prairie changes. Cottonwoods grow tall, elm trees start stealing the sunlight, the grasses beneath them wither and die, the trees spread out and multiply, and eventually, over the years, bit by bit, tree by tree, acre by acre, the prairie is remade. And this is precisely what had happened to the Baker Ranch. Jack stood at the window of his old bedroom, the same window where, as a child, he looked for hours upon the swirling grasses that spread out in every direction. Now trees interrupted the horizon. The fields surrounding their old white house were now dotted with them, leaning with that particular wind-blown tilt, growing up crooked, nudged that way by the prairie's relentless bullying air. Lawrence had stopped burning these fields 30 years ago, and the Flint Hills was no longer a place where wildfires rampaged freely, and thus the Baker Ranch was slowly turning into woods, a perfectly rectilinear forest inscribed within the otherwise low-lying grass. The last time Jack stood in this room, he was 18 years old, carrying a duffel bag of clothes and his sister's old Polaroid camera. Mm. And his mother's steel typewriter. He walked out of this room and then out of the house well before dawn, and his father drove him in that old green Ford to the Greyhound station in Emporia, where Jack caught the express bus to Chicago. His mother had not said goodbye that morning. She would pray for his soul, but would not speak to him face to face, for she could not countenance what he was choosing to do with his life. He was following Evelyn to Chicago. He was going to be an artist just like his big sister, and Ruth could not abide. It was her opinion that Evelyn, who was beautiful and bright and popular and could have done anything she wanted, had thrown it all away chasing some bizarre dream about being an artist. And not even a very good artist, a mediocre artist, barely making a living, never settling down, always on the move. What kind of a life was that? Ruth could not understand. why Jack would want to repeat his sister's grandest mistake. So that morning, the morning he left Kansas forever, Jack walked past his mother's closed bedroom door, paused, whispered her a quiet farewell, and then took the ride to Emporia in that silent pickup truck. And the only time Lawrence spoke to him the entire trip was at the bus station, where he shook Jack's hand and said, "Well, best of luck to you." And that was the last time Jack heard from his father until Lawrence found him years later on Facebook. In Jack's long absence, the fields around the house had turned to spotty timber, and his old bedroom had been converted into a storage room filled almost to the ceiling with wilting cardboard boxes and yellowing plastic crates and stacks of what Jack could describe only as retail detritus, jigsaw puzzles and board games still wrapped in plastic, socks still bound in their packaging, children's clothes still tagged and folded over some store's white hangers, boxes of desserts with long shelf lives, Twinkies and Nutty Bars, many of the boxes crushed by dozens of shampoos and conditioners in big plastic jugs that sat atop them, and boxed electronics from multiple eras, VCRs and boom boxes, and Bluetooth speakers, and unopened packages of random cables. Also, a full dumbbell set and three yoga mats and four baseball gloves and a frisbee. Gone was the old dresser behind which he'd hidden his Dungeons and Dragons contraband, replaced now by a metal filing cabinet whose every drawer was labeled recipes. This by a woman who, as far as Jack knew, never cooked anything that didn't come directly from a can or box. Jack's old twin bed remained, but was obscured by piles of magazines, stacks tall and lopsided and unstable, wrinkled and creased magazines that were almost entirely home renovation oriented. The room was so full and crowded that it was hard even to open the door, hard to walk to the window, stepping over debris, clearing a small path through the chaos. "Mom?" Jack called out. "What's with all this stuff?" She appeared in the doorway then and looked gently around the room. As always, she had a tendency to not quite look him in the eye, to direct her long stare slightly to his right, at a point in space roughly half the distance between him and the floor. This is the spot she contemplated now, as she mildly said, "Oh, sales." "This is a lot of stuff, Mom." "Clearance sales," she said, "or garage sales, 2-for-1 sales, buy one, get one. I'll see something that's on sale, and, wouldn't it be such a shame to pass up a great bargain? Whatever I buy, I put it in here in case somebody might need it." "Who?" "I don't know," she said, still avoiding his eyes. "Do you need it?" "Maybe," he said, trying to be charitable. "I guess I'll have a look." "Good," she said, nodding, turning now and shuffling out of the room. "Good," she said as she moseyed away. "Good." She still looked basically like his memory of his mother, the same long and straight gray hair, the same clothes she'd worn back in the 80s, the same orthopedic shoes, the same souvenir t-shirts she'd picked up back when the family, this was before Jack was born, still took vacations to Galveston, Branson, Lake of the Ozarks, Pensacola. She moved more slowly now, more gingerly, hunched her shoulders more, dragged her feet as she walked, and in her disposition there was this new aura of detachment, a sense that she was engaging the exterior world with only a small fraction of her usable mind. It was a quality that reminded Jack of the junkies he'd encountered upon moving to Wicker Park. It that look on their faces when they were seriously high, it wasn't bliss exactly, nor was it confusion, but more like profound unavailability. Jack had met his mother that day at the church, the same Flint Hills Calvary Church she'd taken him every week growing up, where each Sunday she'd stand and ask the congregation to pray for her son's forgiveness and redemption. He'd met her there this morning before Lawrence's funeral, Jack getting out of his car and walking up to her and saying, "Hi, Mom." And all the people there, dressed up uncomfortably for a funeral, stared because here was Jack Baker, back now after so many years away. "Good of you to come," his mother had said, not entirely looking at him. "Now come on, people are waiting," and that was it. She'd walked away from him into the church, and Jack, always an expert at interpreting his mother's moods and signals, had understood immediately he still wasn't forgiven. Then the funeral inside the sanctuary of Calvary Church, a converted feed and supply store that still smelled lightly of Purina. Jack had not set foot in this church since high school, but he'd spent much of his childhood here, enduring Sunday sermons about the end times, long prayers about getting right with God before it was too late, Bible study classes about the many sins of the flesh. Walking in today had triggered a sort of sense memory. Jack felt immediately guilty, embarrassed, under suspicion, wicked, watched. He and his mother were ushered to the front pew. There were only 8 pews in the sanctuary, which could hold maybe 50 people max. Jack was surprised that it was so much smaller than his memory of it. And during the service, Jack stared at that lacquered black coffin up near the pulpit and wondered why his father had not once mentioned in all their furious arguing these last few years that he was ill. Ruth had asked for a closed coffin owing to the wasting away of Lawrence's body. She said, his face especially sunken and hollow, he didn't look like himself any more. Ruth told many, many well-wishers during the reception potluck, "I didn't think people would want to remember him like that," she said, and these people took her hand and patted her on the shoulder and said, of course, I understand." Jack observed all of this sort of neutrally, dispassionately. He didn't know or remember anyone at the funeral, so he mostly watched his mother have basically the same conversation over and over, which started when someone would ask, "How are you holding up, Ruth?" And she'd say, "Oh, it's been hard going lately." And she'd talk about how the last few weeks had been especially tough, but Lawrence was in so much pain and he was ready to go be with God and was now in a better place, finishing up when she explained the thing about the closed coffin. And they told her to call if she needed anything, anything at all. Then, after the interaction ran its course, she'd look around and find someone new and walk up to them, and they'd say, "How are you holding up, Ruth?" And she'd say, "Oh, it's been hard going lately." And the whole thing was repeated, a ritual that never seemed to get old for Jack's mother, who, as soon as each conversation ended, would look around the room for someone else to have it with again. Jack made his careful way back through the boxes now, stepping over the haphazard piles that had overtaken his old bedroom, into the hallway, then downstairs, noting how so little in the house had changed. The same old photographs and the same old furniture in all the same old places. In the living room, the same couch that Lawrence had retreated to all those years ago, now newly upholstered, but still bearing that same familiar large divot where his father habitually sat. In the kitchen, his mother stood at the sink, staring out the window, her back to the room. The kitchen looked just as it had when Jack was a child, save for the obvious exception of the computer that sat upon the table, an old beige PC, a mouse grimy from use, a keyboard with a film of dust atop the parts that Florence apparently never used. The function keys, the numeric keypad, the rest of the keys kept clean by his father's busy fingertips. I thought it was a lovely service, Ruth said, didn't you? Yes, Jack said, lovely, and so many people, very good turnout. Though I could not help but notice that the Pattersons did not attend. That woman has always had it out for me. I don't know who that is. Everyone else seemed very happy to see me, don't you think? Don't you think they were happy to see me? Sure, Mom. Very happy, she said, nodding. Next to her on the counter were Tupperware containers full of food that people had been dropping off all day. Potato salads and ham sandwiches and meatloaves. Jack stared at the computer and imagined his father sitting there, ranting furiously upon it. So this is where it all happened, he said. Where what happened? His mother said, not turning around. All of Dad's time on the computer, on Facebook. It's just weird to think that it all happened right here. Is that what he was doing on that thing, Facebook? Mom, he was obsessed with it. Oh, she said, I guess I never asked. He was posting a dozen times a day. About what? Mostly nonsense. Crazy internet theories. Do you believe the stuff he believed? What stuff? About Ebola, fluoride, the Mayan apocalypse. I don't know what any of that means, dear. All those conspiracies, all those diatribes about shadowy evil people controlling the world. I guess he never mentioned it. Really, Jack said? I find that hard to believe. I suppose he was a private man. He couldn't shut up about it online. He seriously never talked about this? Never. It was not the first time Jack had felt confounded by the things his father could keep hidden. There was that story Evelyn had told him about a time when Lawrence was young, no older than Jack was, the morning he left for Chicago, when he discovered some beautiful girl at a ranch outside Wichita and fell in instant love. No, the version of his father that Jack had known was the inscrutable one, the one who lived in as the grasses of the Flint Hills lived, sending all their life and energy and pizzazz deep underground, keeping their largest self hidden and protected and unseen. Keeping Lawrence Baker was a man who neatly matched his landscape. Jack said, did he ever mention me? Oh, a few times, I suppose. And what did he say? That you were doing well. That's it? Yes. And did you ever want to know more? What else was there to know? You were doing well. I have a family, a wife, a son. And where are they today? I told them not to come. I see. I also teach at a university. I'm an artist. Oh, yes, Lawrence did show me some pictures of your art. Very odd. Black swirls and splotches and drips and such. Very strange. He must have found them online. Photographs without a camera, pictures of nothing. This is the reason you abandoned your home. That's what I would be like. And where are they now? She continued her long stare out the window toward the north pasture and at all those young and crooked trees. Jack sat down on one of the chairs at the kitchen table, but not the chair in front of the computer. That chair felt somehow off limits. He said, how long was Dad sick? Oh, I guess a few years now, but he was only really sick the last few months or so. What happened? Cancer, of course. It started in the lungs. The doctor said it was probably from being around all those fires his whole life. When did they find it? I suppose it was, let's see, in 2008? Yes, that winter. Huh, Jack said. That's when he joined Facebook. Is that so? She wet a dish rag and began wiping down counters that looked to be already clean. The doctor started him on chemo then. He didn't mention that, Jack said. Not to me, anyway. In his last correspondence with his father, Jack had argued with the man about, of all things, algorithms, an argument that felt really important at the time, but rather less so now. Death had a way of recasting all other subjects as petty in comparison. Jack had tried to persuade his father that various algorithms were nudging him and influencing him, a task that turned out to be pretty difficult because, of course, algorithms were most successfully manipulative when users were unaware of their manipulation. Thus, the algorithms themselves aspire to total invisibility. You could sometimes sense their nudging, but you could never actually see them. The algorithms were a black box, their code private, their inner workings a trade secret. Why, Jack wondered, had Lawrence sought him out right at the moment of the cancer diagnosis? And why, then, never mention the cancer? Why stay silent when the cancer got worse? Why type so much fury online but never once talk about it in real life? These were questions Jack could not now nor ever answer. For his father was gone, in the ground, in a coffin, the ultimate black box. I'm sorry, Mom, Jack said. That must have been hard. She nodded and continued wiping the counter, pressing hard in this one spot and rubbing at it, and it seemed for a moment that the conversation was over, until his mother said, it really was such bad timing. He had just stripped that barn over at the Winslow Ranch. Now I have all this lumber and not the faintest clue what to do with it. Strip the barn? What do you mean? Oh, I'll show you. She dried her hands and shuffled out the door and led him outside into the bright, chilly October day, around to the back side of the house, where, hidden from the road, there sat a pyramid-shaped pile of wooden planks, weather-beaten, scratched, and nicked, their once red paint now chipped and faded. What is this? Jack said. It's how we've been paying the bills. I don't understand. Well, so many of the ranches have been sold off these last few years. The prairie is all being bought up by these big companies. These outfits in Texas, they're paying millions for all the rangeland in the Flint Hills, but they don't want the houses. So the houses are split off and sold separately. Families in those nice old ranch houses, but they can't afford it. They're outbid every time. Who's outbidding them? City people mostly, buying vacation homes. They come out here once a month talking about how it's so nice to get away from it all. From Kansas City, St. Louis, Wichita. So just about every acre in the county has now been bought by someone who doesn't live in the county. We'd love to keep all that land, but we can't compete with their money. But that still doesn't explain the wood. Oh, right. Well, the whole situation made Lawrence so ticked off that he didn't feel the least bit bad going to those ranches when no one was there and stripping the barns. Nobody was even using the barns anyway, not anymore. So he stripped them all the way down to their studs. Dad was stealing wood? Why? He'd strip the barns and then auction the lumber on the internet. He called it authentic reclaimed barnwood from America's heartland. It sold real well. Oh, Jack said, slumping as he imagined all the new businesses in Wicker Park with their rustic chic aesthetic and his new condo in the shipworks with its barnwood accent wall. And he nodded and said, yeah, feeling just wretched. I'll bet this is a pretty popular. Though we can never figure out why, she said. City folks seem to love it. Can you explain that? Jack suddenly wondered what a place like Wicker Park would look like from this vantage, from the Flint Hills of Kansas. What it would look like to his mother, and he decided, staring forlornly at this pile of wood that was, to be honest, really excellently distressed and evocative, that his home in Chicago would look insatiable. It would look like a place that plundered all the world's money and capital and jobs and people, while places like the Flint Hills were catastrophically emptied. Standing here, Jack imagined that Wicker Park would seem to the people of the prairie like a place that harvested their work, harvested their money, harvested their promising children, harvested their land, even harvested the corpses of their very homes, using the remains to decorate the fancy walls of fancy people who congratulated themselves for recycling. No, Mom, Jack said, I can't explain it. She nodded and, still staring at a point somewhere to the right of him, said, well, with that particular tone that signaled finality, that they were done now. I won't keep you, she said. You probably best be getting back to your family. But I just got here. I'm sure you're busy, she said. Thanks for the visit, waving goodbye while she still looking at the ground. Really? Jack said. That's it? You can have a look through your dad's stuff if you want before I get rid of it. That's all you have to say? I have a lot to do, Jack. I gotta clean up that basement, and I gotta write thank you notes to everyone who sent flowers, and I gotta do all that paperwork, the will and the bank accounts and the retirement nonsense, getting it all straightened out. You'd think the government would make it easy, but no, nuh-uh, no way. Do you want some help? No, I'll take care of it myself, alone, as always. She turned now and shuffled away from him, and Jack almost had to laugh. His mother's obstinance was so absurd. He'd known enough not to expect a prodigal welcome, but of course, but he'd honestly been hoping for more than this bull-headed indifference. It reminded him of how she'd refused to come out of her bedroom the morning he left for Chicago. She had, in all these years, not changed a bit. You still can't forgive me, can you? Jack called to her. After all this time. His mother stopped them and for a moment seemed to stare out at the distance, at the north pasture, and she turned around and, for the first time all day, looked him right in the eye, smiled a sad smile, tilted her head. You know those pictures you make, she said? Those photographs of nothing? Yes, they're not photographs of nothing, they're photographs of her. Then she broke off her stare and continued the slow trudge back into the house, Jack watching her as she went until she disappeared around a corner, and then he too was looking out into the north pasture at the bare trees growing crookedly in the field, some of them tilting like old headstones, others curling out of the ground, thick trunks that bent toward him like arms that were reaching for help. Next chapter. It was Evelyn who taught Jack how to see. It was his big sister who taught him that how you see the world depends in large part on what you intend to do with it. When Evelyn looked at the swirling grass of a pasture, she saw it in terms of color and light and texture and depth and mood. But when their father looked at the same pasture, he did not see it as she did. What he saw instead was fuel. That was how he spoke of it, especially during spring fire season, in the strange vocabulary of a burn boss. He'd look out at the pasture, and it wasn't even a pasture to him anymore. Now it was a burn unit, and all the many plants growing in that burn unit Plants that the rest of the year he would routinely identify as bluestem grass and switchgrass and cordgrass and larkspur and wild sage and milkweed and clover and spiderwort and parsley and aster and echinacea and redroot. All of these individuals became, in the spring, a collective, the fuel load. And the two big important variables were, first, how flammable this fuel was, and second, how the fuel was distributed. Its architecture. There was what he called the surface fuel, the grasses and visible leaf and needle clutter, the dead branches, all the stuff you could see. Above that was the crown fuel, the leaves living in the canopy made by occasionally spindly shrubs or the rare tree, and beneath it all was the ground fuel, the decomposed or decaying organic matter atop the soil, the rotted wood, the leaf mold, the roots, the peat, the duff. It was this layer, the hidden layer, that could most strongly quicken a fire or most easily choke it out. If the ground fuel had been packed down by a wet spring, if thunderstorms came early or winter snow stayed late, then the moisture would collect in this layer and snuff the fire from below. But this year's spring had not been wet. It had been hot and dry spring, a spring of arid southerly wind and relentless sun, which tended to crisp this underlayer to pure kindling. Jack could hear it crunch under his shoes. It's the stuff you can't see that burns the hottest, his father said, frowning. They were walking through the south pasture in the morning of its burn, Lawrence having decided to press forward with his own fires, despite what he called the ongoing wind problem. His plan was to burn the south pasture that day and the north pasture the next, as test runs to evaluate on this land whether the conditions were safe enough to burn on the land of others. The day of a fire was, for Jack, a thrill. His father's crew would come out, and there were usually 8 of them, nearby ranchers who worked part-time in the spring doing burns, and together they'd go through the day's specific fire plan. First, the ignition team would establish how the fire would be set, using either propane torches or road flares, or, as today, these contraptions known as drip torches, which were small canisters with thin metal nozzles filled with some kind of gasoline blend. At the tip of the nozzle was a wick, and when the wick was lit and the guys tipped the canister upside down, it created a thin waterfall of pure liquid fire, which was, of course, amazing, and it sent Jack into long daydreams about maybe becoming a drip torch operator himself one day. Okay, so maybe he's like a kid still here. Oh, thank you, Rob. The palm tree, thank you. Wonder what else she is going to wear and be like this interesting. His mom? Oh, his mom was gonna wear? They had those what do they call them? Shirts from vacations. I like those vintage shirts. I'm trying to get one that's like Hawaii or Connecticut or where else? Thank you, Jerry. Where was I? Oh yes, the fire. I feel like something's gonna happen with this fire, and I keep wondering if it did something to the sister. Because why does he keep talking with the fires? Okay. This job was much better than the other available job, that of the spotter. Guys who were spotters kept an eye out for embers floating over the fire breaks. Embers that could ignite uncontrolled spot fires outside the burn unit. It was a boring job because Lawrence's burns were famously uneventful. The way to create the least dangerous, least risky fire possible was to set what was called a backfire, a fire that moved against the prevailing wind, grass as accelerator, wind as brakes. If these two forces were balanced correctly, it resulted in a low, slow, cool fire that crept over the land in long, thin ribbons. But the problem today, indeed, the problem this whole spring, was that the wind was too strong, too gusty, would press too hard against the fire, stopping its spread. We just gotta hope the fuel is flammable enough, Lawrence said, looking dubiously into the sky after one particularly heavy gust. Otherwise, this fire's going nowhere. The other method would have been to start a head fire, a fire that moved in the same direction as the wind, a fire fed by grass and wind at once. A hot and fast fire of the type that painters tended to portray in their domestic or dramatic depictions of prairie fires. Those great blazing infernos, but most burns did not actually look like this. Most burns were short and lackadaisical and well behaved. See that? Lawrence said as he pointed to a spot in the pasture where the thick vegetation gave way to bare soil, patches of grass like small islands in the dirt. That's what we call a large horizontal fuel discontinuity. Gonna need a new ignition point right there. Jack nodded as if to concur. Yeah, he said. Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Nearby, Evelyn was photographing the pasture with a Polaroid camera. She took tight shots of the grass where it was most tangled and knotted. These images were meant to evoke nature's chaos, she said, then took wider photos of the broad, windswept landscape, these images evoking nature's symmetry. That was the paradox of grass, she told Jack. What was monolithic from afar was infinitely varied and complicated once you got up close. Evelyn found the spectacle of a fire delightful. What do they call that? Pyromaniac? Uh, she walked behind the ignition crew and took pictures during these daytime fires, but her favorite thing was a nighttime blaze. When she sat with her acrylics and canvases watching from a nearby field, painting evocative landscapes by lit whitely from above by the moon and orangely from below by strings of flame snaking over the land's soft curves. It amused Lawrence that his job, which to him was as prosaic as any old job, was to his daughter so magical. It amused him as few things seemed to amuse him. He grinned and she danced behind them, looking through the Polaroid, the camera occasionally clacking and ejecting another photo. I don't know what you think is so interesting about all this, he said. Everything, she said, spreading her arms dramatically wide. Fire! It's so elemental, so prehistoric. It's renewing, it's life giving. It consumes what's dead and makes way for the next generation. Don't you find the symbolism delicious? Don't you find it all so beautiful? It's just work, Evie, he said. It's just work, Evie, she said in comic mockery of his deep, even voice. Listen, just because it's work doesn't mean it's not also beautiful. If you say so, I do say so. Okay, he said, nodding at her, grinning. Then Lawrence seemed to remember that Jack was there. I think it's time for you to get going, he said. And so Jack ran back into the house, where in the living room he found his mother in her pink robe, standing at the south facing window, watching. Why is Evelyn taking pictures of grass? She said. The symbolism, the symbolism, she said, making a face. She could become exasperated so quickly, so easily. She always has to fancy everything up. It's just a field. It's just grass. They watched from the windows as outside the ignition crew got into position and the spotters took their places at the fire breaks. And Lawrence, still chatting with Evelyn, made this slight motion with his head, a nod in the direction of the pasture, which Jack recognized as the, well, I guess I ought to be going gesture his father had used countless times when excusing himself from a room. Lawrence's most frequent disposition when he was around the house could probably be best described as just about to leave. But as he looked at her and she moved in close to him and spun the camera around in her hand and lifted it up so that it was pointed backward at the two of them, and they pressed tightly together, Jack imagined his sister saying, "Smile." As she took the picture, even at this distance, he could still see the white pop of the flash, after which Lawrence and Evelyn stayed standing there like that, squeezed together, looking down at the photo, waiting for it to develop. Evelyn was leaning her cheek on his shoulder, a pose of unguarded friendliness and affection, and Jack was pretty sure he had never seen his father show anyone the kind of warmth he was showing. A pyromant, yeah, with a Y. Isn't that what they call people that are like in love with like fire? Showing Evelyn right now, simply standing there, being still, not pulling away, not maneuvering to escape. Next to him, Jack could feel a mood settle over his mother. He could often sense these moods, even when the two of them were in separate rooms. How Ruth's displeasure changed the whole frequency of the house. But up close like this, it felt like a kind of physical heat. The way he dotes on her, she said, jaw tightening. The rest of us may as well be dead. And then she walked quietly to her bedroom and closed the door behind her. Jack heard the squeak of springs as she settled into her twin bed. Then he heard the television click on, followed by the manic cheers of a game show audience. He knew he should go to her right now. He knew that the correct thing to do was to go into her room and sit at the foot of her bed and be silent and wait like that until she felt like speaking, to offer a wordless display of fidelity and sacrifice and support, and then to give her, when she eventually began talking, a convenient object at which to direct her scorn himself. Because even though his father was an all around tougher guy than Jack was, it was also true that in this one way, Jack was much tougher because he could sit there with the vortex of Ruth's resentment and just tolerate it. But Jack didn't want to do that. He didn't want to go to her room. He wanted to see a fire. It was a dumb, boyish impulse, this desire to watch things burn. He raced upstairs to observe it all, kneeling at his bedroom window. The wind that day blew out of the south, and so the ignition team began on the pasture's northern edge. From his vantage on the second floor, Jack could see the wicks of the torches being lit, could see the first drips of fire spilling onto the grass, could see the first flames leap into the air, but he did not see smoke. During a typical fire, the first smoke that appeared would be white, a bright and almost translucent gentle fog that drifted into the air if the conditions were favorable, if the breeze was not too strong, and the ground was appropriately moist. White smoke was mostly not smoke at all. It was mostly water, mostly steam boiled out of the ground, which was necessary before the land would actually unite or ignite. That was followed by the first real flames, which produced almost no smoke at all. The real smoke came later, when the grass began smoldering, when the fire slowly rolled over the pasture, consuming it with placid but steadfast intent. Those were the fires that produced the broad gray brown plumes that on the plains could be seen for miles. But today was not such a day. Today, the ignition crew dripped their torches and the fire slicked across the grass, and everyone had to leap back as the fire flared up in great bursts that had no smoke at all. So efficiently and hotly did the grass burn. It was like the kindling of the ground fuel that did it, the crunchy, dry underlayer making the ground a kind of tempestuous bomb that burned bright and wild and tall and quick, too quick, it turned out. As soon as the fire caught, the wind knocked it back toward the ignition team, who retreated to avoid being singed. And then the fire spread in random, unpredictable ways. Some fronts extinguished quickly by the wind, others driven by momentary gusts into strange directions, moving the right at right angles to the wind as if trying to flank it, creating de facto mini headfires that ripped through the grass back at the crew who had to retreat once more. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. The team proceeded slowly that day, in fits and starts. A burn that usually looked so elegant, like a single ripple of fire that crept quietly over the land, was today a patchwork. The flames raging in one direction, dying in others. The ignition. Oh, thank you, Bruce. See, that I feel like they would have expected this. Like everybody knows that fire can move very quickly. Okay, let's see. A burn that usually looks so elegant, like a single ripple of fire that crept quietly over the land, was today a patchwork, the flames raging in one direction, dying in others. The ignition crew advancing and withdrawing. Through it all, Lawrence watched from the fire break, arms crossed, impassive, stoic as ever, studying the whole uncooperative mess. Evelyn stood next to him. She had stopped taking pictures. It was maybe an hour of watching this before Jack heard movement in the house, the opening of a door, then footsteps climbing the stairs, and then his mother was there with him. She surveyed the room, the piles Evelyn had made. His sister had fully colonized the space, which was now filled with her clothing and paints and canvases and supplies. Then Ruth looked at the walls, at the posters on the walls, the deep Kooning and the Rothko American Gothic. It might have been the first time she'd ever seen the posters. She'd been avoiding this room ever since Evelyn had taken up temporary residence here. You're not allowed to go outside with her anymore, she said. She wasn't looking at Jack exactly, but at the window behind him. No more mornings together, she said. No more painting, ever. But he said, standing up, why? She's a bad influence on you. No, she's not, he said, louder and more passionate than he'd intended. His mother squinted at him, crossed her arms, and he tried to calm himself, bring the volume down. She's teaching me things. Bad things? But I like it, though. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. You don't know anything, Jack. You can't see how she's manipulating you. No, she isn't. How she's turning you against me. We only talk about art. Oh, art. Okay, right, she said with a laugh. That's exactly what I mean. My God, she has you so fooled. She has everyone so fooled. It's not like that, Jack said. What has all her art ever gotten her, huh? She moves from town to town, no job, no family. You don't watch out, you're going to end up just like her, a waste, an embarrassment. She's not an embarrassment. He searched for the right word. Brave, he finally said, which is more than I can say for you. Oh, no, you didn't. The air seemed to suck out of the room as soon as he said it. I'm sorry, he said almost right away as he slumped over and looked at the floor, a posture of total supplication. His mother stared at him, silent, shocked. Well, I just don't know about you, she finally said. I didn't mean it. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I'm really sorry. No more, Evelyn. You hear me? You don't need any more of that girl's influence. His mother stood over him for a moment, hands on her hips. It was not like Jack to be at all disagreeable with her, and she probably took his mutiny as evidence of Evelyn's deep imprint upon him. These posters, she said, I want you to take them down, all of them. But take them down now. And so Jack stood up slowly, showing his displeasure more obviously than he usually would dare. He went to American Gothic. Evelyn had tacked it to the wall, and he tried to pull out one of the bottommost tacks, but found that he couldn't get his fingernail underneath it, not without damaging the poster, and so he wiggled the tack back and forth, hoping to gently pry it free. And he did this until his mother said, "Oh my God," and strode over and grabbed the top edge of the poster and with a quick and angry jerk ripped it down. Then she began pulling at the other posters, tearing and shredding them, and she kept going like that until all the posters were ripped to ribbons at her feet. Evelyn found him there some time later, found him sitting cross-legged over the remains of American Gothic, softly crying. She came in smelling of charcoal, the front of her dress smeared with ash. She saw his tears, saw the pile of torn paper, saw how all the room's posters had been removed, and she must have deduced the rest. She sat down cross-legged next to him and placed a palm on his back. I want you to listen to me very carefully, she said. I know it doesn't seem possible now, but this is all going to pass, okay? You're going to come out of this and you're going to be fine. He nodded but did not speak. He was holding his face in his hands, partly to catch the tears and partly to hide the fact of his crying. He always felt guilty when he was crying, guilty that his crying demanded attention, and he was a child uncomfortable making demands or enduring attention. Let me show you something, Evelyn said. She pulled from her backpack a stack of Polaroids and began shuffling through them. Here it is, she said. I just took this. Look. It was a photo of charred and smoking ground, dirt and ash everywhere, except in the middle of it all a bundle of flowers which stood strong and untouched. Jack recognized the plant as red root, or as Evelyn liked to call it, wild snowball, about 3 feet tall, bushy white flowers, the only living thing in all that soot. Isn't this amazing? She said. The fire burned everything else, but spared this one flower. The fire went right around it. Everything else died, but this one thing lived. Isn't that incredible? I guess, Jack said, wiping his nose. Actually, it's more than incredible. It's a miracle. Okay. Oh, you have to say it with way more feeling than that. What? A miracle is a sacred thing, Jack. You have to be thankful for it. You have to acknowledge it properly with an awe and gratitude. You have to say it like you mean it. Come on, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle, she said, arms raised in the air. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle, he said, arms up, leaping to his feet. There you go. He smiled. He could feel the tears drawing back now. Evelyn seemed to have that effect on him. Her brightness was so contagious. And right now, she said, this flower is you. It is? Yes, I know you feel like the fire is all around you. And I know it feels hopeless, but trust me, it's not hopeless. You'll come out on the other side. It'll pass. You'll survive. He nodded at her. Okay, he said. You will. I know it. They'll see, Mom, Dad, everyone. They'll see what a miracle you are. Thank you. Also, don't worry about the poster, she said. It's only paper. She picked up a handful of shredded American Gothic and flung the pieces into the air. Who gives a shit about paper? He laughed as he watched the scraps flutter to the ground. Now, let's get cleaned up and go downstairs and try to make nice with Mom. That night, Ruth Baker was at her most terrifying, which is to say, she was silent. All four of them sat at the kitchen table, eating the beef chili that Ruth had heated up directly out of the can. None of them said a word. And this was maybe worse than when Ruth was in a mood of high public complaint because it meant she was seething. It meant a punishment was brewing. And in the quiet moments before the punishment was revealed, it was difficult to achieve normal, unburdened conversation. And so they all sat there eating, Jack amazed at how loud eating actually was, with all the clinking of spoons on bowls and the gloppy chewing and the awful wet swallowing, amazed both at the high volume and the fact that under normal dinner circumstances, nobody even noticed it until Ruth, unprompted, finally spoke. Lawrence will be leaving, she said, tomorrow. All heads popped up. Lawrence stopped chewing and looked at her, swallowed, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and said with a strange formality, Yes, I'm going to take the crew back south and get the burns going. I thought it was too windy, Evelyn said. I suppose you could say that I have. He glanced at Ruth, who kept her eyes fixed on her chili. Re-evaluated, he said, which meant he'd been instructed. He'd been told to leave. There had been, at some point tonight, a conversation. Jack never knew what his parents talked about during these conversations, just that afterward they were tense and guarded, as defensive as the copperheads he occasionally found in the grass. All silent potential, deadly threat. But first, I need to finish the burn here, Lauren said. Couldn't get it done today. When? Evelyn said. Tonight. Tonight, Evelyn said in a rush of excitement. Can I watch? Well, Lawrence said, glancing up at his wife, I don't see why not, which drew a loud and immediate chuck from Ruth. We did not agree to that, she said. I just want to paint it, Evelyn said. I don't believe I was talking to you, Ruth said. Then, quietly, measuredly, she said to her husband, Come with me, please. And the two of them went outside, and the way Lawrence followed her, slouched over in this posture of pure defeat, made Jack feel a little bolt of hatred for him. That a man so tall and proud and honorable could be brought so low, it made him wish his parents had never met each other, whatever the consequence to his own existence. It's going to be some night, Evelyn said, rolling her eyes. Then she wandered off upstairs to her room. Jack stayed in the kitchen. He transferred the leftover chili to Tupperware, put it in the refrigerator, dumped everyone's uneaten portions into the trash, tied up the trash bag, took it out to the bins behind the house, shut the bins tight to keep out interested raccoons and coyotes. Then washed all the dirty dishes, set them in the drying rack, wiped down the table and the sink, went into his parents' bedroom, laid out his mother's pink robe on her bed, turned the television to CBS, and waited for her there. It was his experience that when his mother was angry, her anger tended to dissolve if he could do as much as possible to soothe her pat here, robed in bed in front of the TV. He waited outside. Her voice grew to a desperate crescendo, and then she was coming back into the house, slammed door, Hard footsteps into the kitchen, a brief silent pause before moderately lighter footsteps into the bedroom, where she stopped at the door and considered the scene, her robe, Jack waiting for her cross-legged on the floor, knew her at a medium volume on the television. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Then she wrapped herself in her robe and they sat together wordlessly until the end of the episode, at which point she finally broke her silence. "Tell your sister she can go outside and paint." Jack, his face turned away from his mother, smiled. He wouldn't have smiled if she could see him, wouldn't want her to know how much he desired this concession, this possible warming of mother-daughter relations, because it meant that maybe Evelyn could stay, maybe for a few days longer. And so while Ruth explained to Jack that she'd changed her mind, that Evelyn could go watch the fire tonight, North Pasture, Jack was nodding at her, but also imagining more mornings with his sister out in the hills, reading the dawn with her, more stories about the big outside world, the people she'd met, the adventures she'd had, more time with her and all her daily miracles. "Go on," Ruth said. "Tell your sister, then come right back." And so Jack did exactly that, ran up the stairs and found Evelyn, who was already dressed in her typical outdoor uniform, her polka dot dress, her stained white sneakers, her backpack full of supplies. And she hugged him when he told her the news. "I suppose I have you to thank for this sudden change in mood," she said, her arms squeezing him tight. "Maybe," he said, grinning. She gathered all her supplies, bounded down the stairs. He followed her to the front porch and was watching her go out into the night when she spun around and looked back at him, smiled, said, "I wish we could have grown up together." Then she waved, and he waved back, and she jogged off into the howling darkness. And he was feeling really excellent about all this, how he'd managed the situation so well. He walked back into his mother's room and sat again on the floor next to her in bed, all aglow with possibilities. The next hour of Cagney and Lacey would be, he would later recall, the last hour of cheer he ever felt in that house. He would much later think that if he'd acted sooner and not sat in the warmth of his dumb accomplishment, or if he'd gone to his mother earlier in the day, if he'd let her vent at him and not at his father, if they'd kept to the original schedule and never done a night fire in the first place, or if he just listened more carefully, all of this not yet dawning on him as Cagney and Lacey ended and the local news began. The top story, as usual, being the drought and the wind. And Jack stood up and stretched and moseyed over to look out the bedroom window at the south pasture, made binoculars out of his hands and pressed them against the glass, and looked out into the night and saw, strangely, nothing, no activity at all in the south pasture. And yet he'd heard the voices of the fire team, heard all their trucks arrive during the show. "Where is everyone?" he said. "What do you mean?" his mother said. "I don't see them. Where are they?" "In the north pasture, silly." Jack looked at his mother then, a quiver of dread in his belly. "You said Evelyn should watch from the north pasture." "No," she said. "I told you they were burning the north pasture." And they stared at each other for a moment, a terrible knowledge growing between them. "Where's Evelyn?" she said. But already he was sprinting out the door, out of the house, running barefoot over the sharp rocks of the gravel driveway, but not even feeling them, not when he saw at the north pasture's fire break his father and the rest of the ignition team all holding road flares, which they right now snapped, furious shots of red bursting into the night, and Jack screamed at them to stop, but it was of no use. They could not hear him over the raging wind, and Jack's small legs could not carry him fast enough to reach them before those flares were thrown one by one into the field, gentle parabolas in the sky. Evelyn could not have known what was happening, even if she'd seen the ignition team from the middle of that immense field, as big as a baseball stadium, and at night and on the plains where distances were distended and strange. She couldn't have understood what they were about to do. She probably would have assumed they were once again setting a backfire at the south pasture. She would not have known that Lawrence had changed the plan, that his struggle with the day's earlier burn had made him decide in favor of a head fire tonight, to work with the wind instead of fighting against it, to stand outside the field and ignite it at a distance with flares, and to arrange his spotters to look for firebrands shooting out of the pasture, so that when the fire's light erupted, they were focused on the field's outskirts, not the field's middle, where they might have made out in the distance a small but distinct pop of color, a polka dot dress. When the flares landed in that dried and brittle grass, the flames erupted immediately, and then, given oxygen and momentum by the howling wind, the fire seemed to gather up and explode, and all at once it was an enormous wave, 10 feet tall and raging northward faster than anyone could possibly move. Jack sprinting toward the ignition team and then right past them, screaming incoherently and hearing his father yell his name, but he did not stop, not even when he reached the pasture and the ground was crisp and hot and glowing. Still he ran, and what came to him as he watched the fire rushing farther away was his sister's Polaroid picture, the image of that single surviving flower, and suddenly he was convinced that it was a sign, it was fate, that she photographed that flower, but she hadn't properly understood it. That miraculous wild flower wasn't him, it was her, and the fire would pass right by her and he'd find her untouched, just as she had found that flower. He was sure of this as he kept running, as he heard big footsteps closing in behind him, as his feet ignited in agony. He was waiting to see her emerge from the darkness, blackened but astonishingly alive, and he was screaming with what, to those who chased him, sounded like actual wonder and belief and awe, screaming over the psalm that his sister had taught him. It's a miracle, it's a miracle, it's a miracle. Oh, and that's the end of that chapter. And we will start the next section tomorrow. I believe we're going to be on page 529, of which there are, let's see how many pages. I think it's around 600, but let's see. 597. So we're getting there. We're getting there. What did I tell you? I knew it was going to be something with that damn fire because they kept talking about the fires, foreshadowing when I call it throughout the whole book, right? Um, I'm surprised that the parents stayed together because you hear that after a child dies, a kid of the parents or whatever, that often people get divorced after that. So um yeah, it's pretty um interesting how they stayed miserable together for life. Um that's really sad, but I feel like who could have saw this coming? Anyway, um Wednesday, the show Wednesday? I think that the second part of the second season premieres tonight at midnight on Netflix because it's supposed to premiere Wednesday and it's Tuesday night. So I'm gonna stay up and see. I'm gonna see. I'm gonna ask Google uh if it's gonna be on tonight. Watch that. And I think there was something else coming, but I didn't think of what it was. I feel like I almost kicked her at one point. Like, I'll have to stretch out. Um, but anyway, I'll let you know how it is. That is my plan. I love you so much. Have a good sleep. I see you tomorrow. Mwah.